She spent 3 years believing he was gone. He spent 3 years building an empire, just to be worthy of her again. But when they finally stand face to face, neither of them is who they used to be. This is a story about a love that survived abandonment, shame, and the kind of silence that slowly destroys a person from the inside out. If you've ever loved someone who disappeared without explanation, this one is for you. Stay until the very end. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The elevator doors opened on the 42nd floor, and Eva Morales walked straight into the life she had spent 3 years trying to forget. She wasn't supposed to be there. That was the first thing she told herself when she stepped off the elevator and felt the cold, recycled air of Blackwood Dynamics hit her face like a warning. She was supposed to be in her studio apartment on the east side of Chicago, grading undergraduate papers and eating leftover pad thai out of a plastic container. She was supposed to be living her small, manageable life, the one she had carefully rebuilt after the collapse, the one with no surprises and no sharp edges. Instead, she was here, wearing her best blazer and a pair of heels that were already threatening to blister, holding a leather portfolio that belonged to her best friend Carmen, standing in the lobby of one of the most powerful corporate headquarters in the city. 7 days. Carmen had begged her the night before, voice cracked with fever, barely able to sit upright on her couch. Just cover the placement for me. 1 week, Ava. You're between semesters, you've got nothing going on, and the agency already has your paperwork on file from last summer. They won't even blink. She'd pressed the folder into Ava's hands before Ava could argue, and somewhere between Carmen's pathetic coughing and the guilt of watching her best friend practically disintegrate into her throw pillow, Ava had said yes. 7 days as a temporary executive assistant at Blackwood Dynamics. 7 days of fetching coffee and scheduling meetings and keeping her head down in a building full of people who made more money before breakfast than she made in a year. She could survive 7 days. The lobby receptionist was a young man with a practiced smile and a headset that made him look like he was managing air traffic control. He checked her name against a list, printed a badge, and pointed her toward a bank of elevators at the far end of the marble floor. 42nd floor, he said. Ms. Reeves from HR will orient you. The elevator ride was 42 floors of silence and fluorescent light, and Ava spent every second of it reminding herself that this was temporary. It was money. It was 7 days. She would keep her head down, do the work, and leave. The doors opened. The 42nd floor was everything the lobby promised, and then some. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Chicago skyline on 3 sides. The city spread out below like a circuit board lit up and humming with its own electricity. The carpet was the kind of deep charcoal gray that cost more per square foot than Ava's rent. Every desk was clean, deliberate, minimal. The kind of workspace that communicated power without needing to announce it. People moved through the space with a particular kind of velocity, that specific urgency that came from knowing your time was billable and your mistakes were expensive. Ava straightened her blazer and walked toward the reception desk. A woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses perched low on her nose appeared from a side office and extended a hand. Miss Morales, Patricia Reeves, head of HR operations. Her grip was firm and efficient. We appreciate your flexibility on short notice. Of course, Ava said, happy to help. Carmen spoke highly of you. We've used the agency for temporary placements before, and the quality has generally been reliable. Patricia was already moving, already expecting Ava to follow, speaking over her shoulder as she navigated past a cluster of desks. The executive assistant position requires discretion above everything else. You'll be managing the schedule and correspondence for this floor's senior leadership. Standard confidentiality agreement, which you'll sign before your first task. Ava nodded, following her down a wide corridor lined with glass-walled conference rooms. Through one window, she could see a meeting already in progress. 7 or 8 people in expensive suits, a presentation on screen, tension visible even from the hallway in the way nobody was leaning back in their chairs. You'll primarily be supporting the floor's operations, Patricia continued. But your anchor assignment is the executive suite at the end of this corridor. She paused in front of a closed door at the corridor's end. Dark wood, no window, and affixed to the wall beside it, a brushed steel nameplate with black lettering, clean and precise and absolutely unmistakable. Damon Blackwood, Chief Executive Officer. The words hit Ava in the chest like a fist. She stopped walking. Patricia had already moved to open the door and turned back when she noticed Ava wasn't beside her. Miss Morales? Ava was staring at the nameplate. She was aware, distantly, that her portfolio had shifted in her grip, that her fingers had tightened around the leather strap, that something in her chest had locked up in a way that made breathing require conscious effort. Damon Blackwood. She knew that name. She had spent 3 years teaching herself not to know that name. Miss Morales? Patricia's voice sharpened slightly. Are you all right? Ava forced herself to exhale, to look away from the nameplate, to reorganize her expression into something professional and neutral. Yes, she said. Sorry, long morning. Patricia studied her for a brief moment, then nodded and pushed the door open. Mr. Blackwood is in meetings until 10. His assistant's workspace is through the anteroom. I'll walk you through the systems. Ava walked through the door. She kept her chin level and her jaw set and her hands perfectly still, and she walked through that door the way a person walks through a burning building, with the specific, controlled focus of someone who knows that panic will kill them faster than the fire will. The anteroom was spacious and immaculate. A broad desk sat facing the interior office door. Another closed door, solid wood, no window. A monitor, a phone system with more lines than Ava had ever used, a color-coded calendar array on a second screen. A window behind the desk looked out over the city at a height that made the streets below look like a model someone had built for display. Patricia walked her through the calendar system, the correspondence protocols, the contact hierarchy. Ava listened carefully, asked the right questions, wrote things down in the small notebook she'd brought from home. She did all the things a competent professional was supposed to do. And underneath all of it, her pulse was hammering at a frequency she could feel behind her eyes. Damon Blackwood. She hadn't heard his name spoken aloud in over 2 years. She had deliberately, methodically excised him from every part of her life she could control. The social media unfollows, the box of photographs she'd left on the curb one evening in a moment of rage and grief, the way she'd trained herself to change the subject whenever anyone from their old university crowd tried to bring him up. She had been so careful. She had done so much work, and now his name was on a door she was sitting 5 feet away from. Patricia wrapped up the orientation with the crisply professional warmth of someone who had done this hundreds of times. Mr. Blackwood's first post-meeting opening is at 10:15. He prefers briefings kept to 5 minutes or less unless he asks for expansion. He doesn't like small talk. He takes his coffee black, no sugar, and if you ever bring him anything other than the brand specified in the supplier file, he won't say anything, but you'll know. She allowed herself a thin, knowing smile. Any questions? No, Ava said. Thank you. Patricia left. The anteroom fell quiet. Ava sat at the desk, stared at the closed interior door, and had a very direct conversation with herself about the reality of the situation. Damon Blackwood. Her Damon Blackwood, the boy who had sat across from her in a campus coffee shop 4 years ago with ink on his fingers and a half-finished economics textbook and a smile that made her chest feel like it was made of warm weather. That Damon Blackwood was apparently the CEO of one of the most powerful private companies in Chicago. He was apparently worth, according to the financial press she was already pulling up on her phone under the desk, somewhere north of $800 million. And he had apparently accomplished all of that while she spent 3 years assuming he was either dead or had simply stopped caring whether she existed. The anger arrived later than she expected it to. First came the disorientation, the vertiginous quality of standing at the edge of something enormous and not yet understanding its depth. Then came the grief, fast and involuntary, that specific kind that lived in the body rather than the mind. A tightness in the throat, a sudden and unwanted moisture at the corners of her eyes that she blinked away furiously. Then, settling in underneath both like a foundation, came the anger, old and well-maintained and entirely rational. She had 7 days. She could do 7 days. She opened the calendar system, pulled up the day's schedule, and started working. At precisely 10:14, the outer door to the corridor opened and Ava heard voices. 2 men, from the sound of it. One voice she didn't recognize, clipped and slightly nasal, talking about projected quarterly numbers. The other voice she recognized in her bones before her brain had finished processing the sound. 3 years had deepened it slightly, smoothed certain edges while sharpening others. but it was the same voice that had once read her passages from novels she'd never heard of while they lay on the floor of his apartment listening to the radiator knock. It was the same voice that had said her name in the dark like it was the most important word he knew. She did not look up from the monitor. The outer door opened fully, and she heard the other man, Marcus, she would learn later, the CFO, finish a sentence about the European expansion timeline. She heard Damon respond in two clipped sentences that closed the conversation. She heard footsteps crossing the anteroom carpet. She kept her eyes on the screen. "You're not Carmen." His voice directed at her now from approximately 4 feet away. Ava looked up. The man standing in front of her desk was wearing a charcoal suit with a collar-open white shirt, no tie, no pocket square, none of the performative accessories she might have expected from a CEO of his profile. He was leaner than she remembered, taller somehow, which didn't make physical sense but felt true in the way his presence occupied space. His jaw was harder. There were shadows under his eyes that spoke of chronic sleep deprivation rather than a single bad night. He held himself with the particular stillness of someone who had learned to keep his body under control in situations where other people's bodies betrayed them. And he was looking at her the way you look at something you cannot immediately categorize, not recognition, or, and this was the part that broke something open in her chest, something far more devastating than non-recognition. He was looking at her with the expression of a man who had expected to feel nothing and had just discovered, in real time, that his expectation was wrong. Ava held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds. "Carmen is sick," she said. "I'm her replacement, Ava Morales. The agency sent over my paperwork this morning." A silence. Something moved across his face. Not quickly, not dramatically, not the way things moved across people's faces in films. Slowly, like weather, like the sky changing color in the hour before a storm when most people aren't paying attention. "Morales," he said. "That's correct." Her voice was even. She was proud of it. "How long is the placement?" 7 days. Another silence. He looked at the desk. Not at her, at the desk, at the monitor, at the color-coded calendar displayed on the second screen. Processing. She could see him doing it, the calculation behind his eyes. "Fine," he said. He moved toward the interior door and then stopped, hand on the frame, back to her. "The 10:30 with the Singapore team runs long. Clear whatever I have after 11. "It's already clear," she said. "You had a lunch, but I moved it." A pause. "I haven't told you to move anything yet." "Your calendar notes from last week indicated the Singapore call historically extends to 90 minutes minimum. It seemed efficient." He didn't respond. He went through the interior door and closed it behind him. Ava turned back to her monitor. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the desk until they stopped. The first 3 days were a particular kind of hell that Ava found herself, in her worst moments, almost capable of admiring for its precision. It wasn't dramatic. There were no confrontations in the corridor, no charged moments in the elevator, no tearful collisions in the break room. It was the hell of proximity, of existing in the same carefully regulated 42 floors of air as a person you had once loved with the specific, reckless abandon of someone who doesn't yet know how badly love can damage you. Damon was professional. That was the word she kept returning to because it was the most accurate and the most brutal. He was professional with her the way he was professional with the junior analysts and the building maintenance staff. Not unkind, not dismissive, but operating at a distance that made it clear personal history was not a variable in his current calculations. He gave her tasks. She completed them. He gave her feedback when necessary, always specific, never personal. He said thank you occasionally, in a tone that sounded like a man who had trained himself to say it, rather than a man who felt it. On the first day, she made a scheduling error, minor, correctable, a double booking she caught herself 20 minutes after it happened and fixed before either party was affected. She would not have thought twice about it, except that when she checked the corrected calendar, she found that he had noticed it before she'd fixed it. There was a note in the shared system, time-stamped 8 minutes before her correction. Already flagged, nothing else, no critique, just the information. She stared at those 2 words for longer than she should have. On the second day, she arrived at 7:15 to find him already in the interior office, voice carrying faintly through the door on a call that sounded like it had been going for hours. She made coffee. She organized the morning's correspondence in the order of urgency she had already developed a feel for, which felt uncomfortably natural for someone who had told herself this was a temporary nothing of a job. When he emerged at 8 for a brief break, he looked at the organized files on his desk. She had moved them from the anteroom to his desk during his call, per the preferences documented in the assistant handbook, and then looked at her standing in the doorway. "You've done this kind of work before," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm adaptable," she said. He looked at her for a moment in that particular way he had, the same way, she realized with a clenching in her gut, that he had always looked at her when he was trying to read something she wasn't showing him. Then he went back into the office. On the third afternoon, something happened that Ava had not anticipated. There was a meeting, a large one, in the glass-walled conference room at the north end of the floor. 11 people, including 3 senior VPs and a pair of external consultants, flown in from New York. Ava had prepared the materials, organized the room, set up the presentation system 40 minutes before the scheduled start. It was part of her job. She slipped out of the conference room once the participants began arriving and returned to the anteroom, her role in that particular scene complete. She was standing at the anteroom window with a cup of coffee, looking out at the city, when she heard voices from the corridor. One of the external consultants, a man named Garrett, mid-40s, had addressed her twice already in a tone that made her feel like she was background furniture, had apparently stepped out to take a call. She could hear him through the anteroom door, which was slightly ajar. "Pulled it together well enough. The materials were solid," Garrett was saying, his voice carrying the casual fullness of someone who assumes they're not being overheard. "The temp girl did fine. Competent enough, I guess. These agencies send whatever they've got." There was a pause, then quietly, "She's a little out of her depth, you can tell. The organization is good, but the instincts aren't there. Probably better suited for administrative work at a smaller operation." Ava set her coffee cup down on the windowsill. She was not unused to being underestimated. She had spent years in academia navigating the particular brand of condescension that came from being a young brown woman in rooms that had historically belonged to other kinds of people. She had developed a whole vocabulary of responses: the calm deflection, the pointed redirect, the performance of deafness that was actually a choice. She knew how to handle it. What she did not anticipate was the sound of the conference room door opening behind her, in the anteroom, and the voice that followed. "Garrett!" Damon's voice. Quiet. The specific quiet of something that isn't loud because it doesn't need to be. The consultant's one-sided phone conversation stopped. "Come back inside," Damon said. "We're starting." "Of course." Garrett's tone shifted immediately, professionally. "One moment. Now." Not a request. A pause. Then footsteps returning to the conference room. Ava turned from the window. Damon was standing in the anteroom doorway, one hand on the frame, looking at her. The expression on his face was not readable in any simple way. It wasn't sympathy. She would have hated sympathy. It wasn't satisfaction. It was something closer to the specific tension of a person who has just done something they told themselves they wouldn't do and is now calculating the implications. "You heard that," she said. "Yes. You didn't have to." "I know." He held her gaze for a beat that lasted exactly long enough to be something. Then he straightened, dropped his hand from the doorframe. "I have a meeting." He went back down the corridor. Ava stood at the window for another 3 minutes before she trusted her face again. On the 4th day, she was at her desk when the outer door opened and a woman walked in. Tall, early 40s, the kind of striking that reads immediately as deliberate. Everything about her appearance was a choice, and every choice was correct. Dark blazer, champagne blouse, heels that added 4 inches she didn't need. She moved through the anteroom with the specific confidence of someone who did not habitually check whether there was space for her, because there always was. She stopped at Ava's desk and looked at her with a polite, precise smile. "I'm Celeste Vaughman. I don't have an appointment, but Damon knows I'm in town. Let him know I'm here." Ava checked the calendar. No appointment. She looked up. "I'm sorry, Ms. Vaughn. Mr. Blackwood is currently It's fine. Just let him know." The smile didn't change. It was the smile of someone who had never once in their adult life been told no by an assistant and fully expected the pattern to continue. Ava picked up the phone and dialed the interior line. Damon picked up on the second ring. "What is it?" There's a Celeste Vaughn here to see you. She says she doesn't have an appointment, but that you'd want to know she was here. A silence. Not the silence of someone surprised. The silence of someone recalibrating. Give me 5 minutes, he said. Ava looked up at Celeste. He'll be with you in 5 minutes. You're welcome to wait. Celeste didn't sit. She stood near the window and looked at the view, and Ava watched her peripherally. There was something between this woman and Damon, not something current necessarily, but something that had existed, something with weight. Ava recognized it the way you recognize a familiar piece of music coming from a distance. Not clearly, but unmistakably. When Damon opened the interior door, Celeste turned immediately. I heard about the Singapore deal, Celeste said before he'd finished opening the door. Congratulations, you pulled it off. We pulled it off, Damon said, with a flatness that was different from his usual contained professionalism. Flatter, more guarded. Are you going to make me stand in the hallway all day, or are you going to invite me in? Damon glanced at Ava, a look she couldn't fully decode. Then he stepped back to let Celeste through the interior door. It closed. Ava turned back to her monitor. Through the closed door, she could hear the low, muffled register of conversation, but couldn't make out words. She didn't try to. She cataloged the correspondence queue with methodical focus, and she did not allow herself to speculate about what was happening on the other side of that door, and she was largely successful. Largely. An hour later, Celeste emerged from the interior office alone. She stopped briefly at Ava's desk. You're Carmen's replacement, she said. That's right. How long are you here? 3 more days. Celeste looked at her, really looked at her, the kind of assessing that felt less like curiosity and more like calculation. Then she smiled again with that polished, airless precision. Enjoy the rest of your week, she said, and left. 30 seconds later, Damon appeared in the interior doorway. He looked at the door Celeste had just walked through. Then he looked at Ava. Clear my afternoon, he said. His voice was different. Something in it pulled tight. It's already relatively clear, Ava said, turning to the calendar screen. You have a 4 o'clock with... Cancel it. Ava canceled it. She made the appropriate notifications. She updated the system. She did all of it without looking at him, and when she had finished, she became aware that he was still standing in the doorway. Miss Morales, he said. She looked up. He was looking at her with that expression again. The one she'd seen when she'd first said her name. The one like weather changing. Something working through him that he had decided not to act on, but hadn't entirely succeeded in suppressing. Is there something you need? She said. No, he said. He went back inside. The door didn't close all the way. Ava stared at the 1-inch gap between the door and the frame for a long moment. Then she turned back to her work. On the 5th day, she stayed late. It wasn't intentional. She'd been working through a backlog of correspondence that had accumulated during the Singapore deal crunch, and the task kept expanding the way such tasks do when you're doing them properly, each item generating 2 more items, each thread revealing a slightly longer tail than you'd estimated. By 7 in the evening, the 42nd floor was largely empty. The overhead lighting had switched to its after-hours mode, dimmer and more directional. Someone had left a blazer on a chair 2 desks down. The Chicago skyline through the windows was all dark glass and orange streetlight and the distant white geometry of the lakefront. Ava was reading a contract addendum when she became aware that someone was standing near the corridor entrance. She looked up. Damon. He was in his shirt sleeves, the jacket gone, collar open. He was holding a glass of water and looking at her with an expression that, for the first time since she'd walked through the door of this building, she couldn't organize into something she knew how to respond to professionally. You're still here, he said. The Singapore correspondence had a longer tail than I estimated. That's not your job description. I was finishing something. He came closer. Not close exactly. He stopped near the desk beside hers, leaning against its edge with the particular body language of a man who has been on his feet for 16 hours and is choosing not to sit down because sitting down would mean this is a conversation rather than a brief pause. He looked out the window. When does the placement end? He said. Day after tomorrow. He nodded. He turned the glass in his hand once. Outside, a light in a building across the street turned off. Damon, she said. She hadn't said his name, not once in 5 days. She had been so careful about that. Mr. Blackwood, every single time delivered with the crisp professionalism of someone who had never known him as anything else. The name coming out now felt like something she'd been holding underwater finally breaking the surface. He looked at her. Why didn't you... She stopped. Started over. How long have you been in Chicago? 4 years? 4 years. He had been in the city for 4 years. She had been in the city for 4 years. The same streets, the same L lines, the same 40-degree springs and brutal Januaries. 4 years of parallel existence, 30 city blocks apart. Did you know I was here? She asked. Her voice was steady. She was proud of it. Something in his jaw shifted. Yes, he said. The word landed like a stone into still water, and the ripples went out in all directions, and Ava sat very still while they moved through her. You knew, she said. Ava, you knew I was here. Not a question now, just the shape of the thing being held up in the light so she could see it properly. For 4 years, it wasn't... He pushed off the desk, turning away slightly, and she could see the calculation in his posture. The practiced control of a man who handled billion-dollar negotiations by managing what he allowed other people to see. It's not that simple. I'm not asking for simple, she said. I'm asking for true. He turned back to her. The city burned quietly beyond the window behind him, all that compressed light and distance, and Damon Blackwood stood in the middle of it looking at her with an expression she had not seen on his face since before everything fell apart. Not the CEO, not the professional, not the carefully maintained construct she'd been watching for 5 days. Just him. Just the parts of him that he apparently hadn't been able to fully replace with something more manageable. Not tonight, he said. His voice was rough at the edges in a way that had nothing to do with fatigue. Not like this. Then when? He looked at her for a long moment. Finish the placement, he said. Day after tomorrow. After that... He stopped. Something moved across his face. Just finish the week. He walked back down the corridor toward his office. Ava watched him go. She sat at the desk for another 20 minutes without reading a single word of the contract in front of her. Then she packed her things, took the elevator down 42 floors, walked out into the Chicago night, and stood on the sidewalk for a long moment with the cold air on her face. He had known she was here. 4 years. He had known. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from Carmen. How's it going? Is it awful? I am so sorry. I owe you forever. Ava stared at the phone. Then she put it in her pocket without answering and walked to the L station. The last day, day 7, began like the others. She arrived at 7:15. She made coffee. She organized the correspondence queue, cleared the morning's calendar of anything that had resolved itself, prepared the briefing notes for the 10 o'clock. She did everything correctly and efficiently, and without visible evidence of the fact that she had spent most of the previous night awake, lying in the dark of her apartment, listening to the city outside her window, and cycling through the same sequence of emotions until they lost their edges from overuse. At 9:40, Damon came out of the interior office. He didn't say anything at first. He stood in the doorway looking at the desk, at her, at the organized materials, at the screen. His tie was slightly looser than usual, small detail. She'd learned to read the small details. The Harrington file, he said. The revised addendum is in the secure folder. Can you print the signature pages and have them on the table in Conference A by 9:55? Already done, she said. They're on the table. A pause. I haven't asked you to do anything yet this morning. The addendum was marked for signature at the 10 o'clock. I anticipated. He looked at her for a moment in that way he had. Then, Ava. She looked up from the screen. He was leaning against the doorframe now, arms crossed, and the distance between CEO and the boy she had loved at 22 was narrower in this light than it had been all week. After the 10 o'clock, he said, lunch. She looked at him. Not as an assignment, he said. Careful, deliberate. I'm asking. The silence between them was the kind that had mass that took up room. Okay, she said. He nodded. He went back inside. Ava turned back to her screen. Her chest felt like something that had been held in a fist for a long time and had just been released. Not comfortable, not resolved, but beginning, slowly, to remember what it was like to expand. The 10 o'clock ran 12 minutes long. At 11:20, Damon came out of Conference A. He had a jacket on. He looked at her. "Ready?" he said. She was standing with her coat over her arm, bag on her shoulder. "You moved my calendar clear," she said. "I moved your calendar clear. That's technically above your pay grade." The corner of his mouth did something very small. "Come on," he said. They took the elevator down in silence. 42 floors of the same silence she'd ridden up in 7 days ago, except this time the silence was full of things rather than empty of them. When they stepped out into the lobby, she noticed that 2 or 3 people tracked them, tracking Damon, specifically, with the peripheral attention that powerful people generate without seeming to notice. He moved through it without acknowledging it. Outside, the Chicago air was sharp and cold, the sky a pale winter white. Damon walked them 2 blocks south to a restaurant she didn't know. Small, unshowy, the kind of place that required knowing about it rather than finding it. Inside it was warm and close and not particularly quiet. They were seated in a corner booth and the normalcy of the act, sitting across from each other in a restaurant, menus, bread on the table, had a quality of wrongness that Ava felt in her sternum. They had done this 100 times. They had never done this at all. Both things were simultaneously true. She put down the menu. "You said not tonight," she said, "on the 5th day. You said not tonight." He looked up from his menu. He set it down. "So," she said, "tonight." The silence that followed was the last wall between them. She could feel him deciding, could see it in the way he held himself. Not the CEO's controlled stillness, but the older tension of a man who had been carrying something for years and was about to finally put it down, or finally drop it, and didn't yet know which. "My father's company," he said. His voice was quiet, stripped of everything professional. 3 years ago, when I disappeared." She held still. "There was a partner," he said, "someone my father trusted with everything. Every contract, every account, every—" He stopped. His jaw tightened. "It went wrong. All of it. In about 6 weeks. We went from stable to nothing. Literally nothing. The house, the accounts, everything my father had built for 30 years. He looked at the table. It happened fast, the way those things do. Ava was very quiet. "I was ashamed," he said. The word came out rough, like it had caught on something on the way. "I know how that sounds. I know it's not—" He stopped again, looked up at her. "You had your scholarship, your program. You had everything lined up in front of you, and I had just watched my whole family's life fall apart in a matter of weeks, and I was working night security and warehouse shifts to keep us from losing the apartment we'd moved into after the house went, and I just—" His voice stayed level, but it cost him. "I couldn't ask you to—" "You didn't ask me," she said. "No." "You disappeared." "Yes." "For 3 years, Damon. Not 3 days. Not 3 weeks." "I know. I thought—" She stopped. Her throat closed briefly. She opened it back up by force of will. "I thought I had done something wrong. I thought you just decided I wasn't worth the effort. I looked for you. I actually looked for you for months. And then I finally decided—" "Ava, don't." She pressed her fingers flat on the table. "Let me finish. I spent 1.5 years deciding I had imagined the whole thing. That I had been the kind of person who invents depth where there isn't any. I spent 1.5 years rebuilding my understanding of my own judgment because of something you could have told me." The restaurant noise moved around them. Someone at the bar laughed at something. A plate arrived at the table adjacent to theirs. Damon looked at her. "I know," he said. Not a defense, not a deflection. Just those 2 words, plain and without flinching, acknowledging the full weight of what she'd said. The silence between them was different now, less like a wall and more like a wound, real and specific, and requiring something other than distance to address. "I never stopped," he began. And then Ava's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced down reflexively. It was Carmen. She hit decline. When she looked back up, Damon was looking at something past her shoulder. His expression had changed, closed slightly, the way a hand closes around something it expects to be hot. She turned. Celeste Vaughn was crossing the restaurant toward their table. She wasn't rushing. She never rushed. But her eyes were on Damon with an expression that contained, underneath the usual polished surface, something that Ava recognized immediately and coldly as belonging to a woman who had counted on a particular outcome and had just discovered the count was wrong. Damon. She stopped at the edge of their booth. She didn't look at Ava at first. Then she did, and the polished smile was precisely as manufactured as ever. I didn't realize you had a lunch. Celeste, Damon said. His voice had returned to the CEO register. Contained, professional, a closed door. This isn't a good time. I only need a moment. Still not asking. There are some things we should discuss before the board meeting next week. The investment structure we talked about is going to require some adjustments. She paused. Some significant adjustments. Something passed through Damon's expression. Not fear, exactly, but the alertness of someone who has just registered a threat. I'll call you this afternoon, he said. Celeste looked at him for a moment, then looked at Ava. The evaluation in her eyes was rapid and precise and left nothing warm in its wake. Of course, she said, and walked away. Ava looked back at Damon. His jaw was set. His hands were on the table. Who is she? Ava asked. Not the official answer, the real one. He looked at her. She invested $12 million in the company 18 months ago, he said. Series B expansion. She holds board influence. And? A pause. She had expectations, he said carefully, about the nature of our arrangement that I never explicitly confirmed. But you never corrected them either, Ava said. The silence that followed was its own answer. Ava picked up her coat from the bench beside her. Ava, I'm not walking out, she said. She looked at him steadily. I need you to understand something. She held his gaze. I survived you leaving once. I rebuilt everything once. If you ask me to trust you again, Damon, if you ask me to open any of this back up, it cannot cost me what it cost me last time. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has just understood the full weight of the debt he's carrying. I know, he said. You keep saying that, because it's the only true thing I've got right now. His voice was low and unguarded. The CEO was entirely gone. I have nothing else. No defense, no good reason, just... He exhaled. I spent 3 years building something I never let myself believe I was building for you, because that felt like too much to admit. And then you walked through that door on Monday and... He stopped. And what? She said softly. And I had to figure out, in about 20 seconds, whether I was going to keep lying to myself. Ava looked at him for a long moment. Outside the restaurant window, Chicago moved in its ceaseless, cold, glittering way. Cabs and pedestrians, and the deep rumble of the L in the middle distance, the whole vast, ongoing machinery of a city that kept going regardless of what any two people in a corner booth decided about each other. I'm not on the floor anymore after today, she said. The placement ends tonight. I know. So whatever this is, she gestured, small and vague in the space between them. It has to be an actual choice, not a proximity thing, not 7 days of forced contact making it seem, it's not proximity, he said. She picked up her coffee cup. Then call me, she said. This week, not from the office line. He looked at her. Okay, he said. She drank her coffee. The restaurant noise washed over them, warm and ordinary and indifferent to the enormity of what had just been negotiated across this small table with its breadbasket and its water glasses and its entirely inadequate capacity to contain 3 years of grief and silence and the slow, terrifying prospect of beginning again. When they walked back to Blackwood Dynamics 20 minutes later, they didn't touch. They walked with an inch of cold Chicago air between them, and Ava looked straight ahead, and she could feel him beside her the way you feel weather. Not just temperature, but pressure, the whole changed quality of the air. She packed her desk in 15 minutes. The personal items were minimal. She'd been a temporary inhabitant of this space and had treated it accordingly. She logged out of the systems, returned the security badge to HR, signed the end-of-placement documentation Patricia Reeves produced with quiet efficiency. In the anteroom, for the last time, she put on her coat. The interior door was closed. She didn't knock. She walked to the elevator, pressed the down button, and stood watching the numbers count upward from below. The elevator arrived. The doors opened. Behind her, the interior office door opened. Ava! She turned. Damon was in the doorway. Jacket off again, sleeves rolled, the specific exhaustion of a man who had been up since before dawn visible in the set of his shoulders. He looked at her the way he'd been looking at her all week, except now there was nothing professional covering it and nothing calculated about it. And it was just him, looking at her, across the anteroom of the 42nd floor of a building he'd built out of shame and grief, and something that apparently still had her name on it. "I'll call," he said. She held the elevator door open. "I know," she said. She let the door close. In the polished steel of the elevator doors, her own reflection looked back at her. Composed, coat buttoned, bag on her shoulder, everything orderly and managed, but her hands were shaking again. And somewhere behind her, she knew Damon Blackwood was standing in his office doorway with $800 million and a $12 million problem that had a name, and the slow dawning understanding that the past he had spent 3 years building an empire to outrun had just walked back through his door. He had said he would call. She had said she knew. But when she stepped out of the lobby into the cold Chicago evening and her phone buzzed in her pocket, not Carmen this time, she stopped walking and looked at the screen and felt the ground shift beneath her feet. It was a forwarded news alert. The headline read, "Blackwood Dynamics, Major Investor Celeste Vaughn. Files for Board Restructure. Sources cite conflict of interest in executive leadership." The alert had been sent by Carmen. Beneath it, a single text. "Ava, what is going on up there?" Ava stared at the screen. The date on the filing was today. The timestamp was 40 minutes ago, right around the time they had been sitting across from each other in that restaurant, talking about trust and second chances and the terrifying arithmetic of beginning again. Celeste Vaughn had already been filing paperwork to burn the whole thing down. Ava read the headline 3 times, standing on the sidewalk outside Blackwood Dynamics, the cold coming up through the soles of her shoes, and the city moving around her with its total indifference to the fact that something had just changed shape in a way she couldn't yet measure. The filing timestamp was 2:47 p.m. They had left the restaurant at approximately 2:30, which meant Celeste Vaughn had walked away from their table, gotten into whatever car was waiting for her, and filed paperwork to restructure the board of a company she had invested $12 million in, all within 17 minutes of seeing Ava Morales sitting across from Damon Blackwood in a corner booth. Ava put her phone in her pocket. She stood on the sidewalk for 10 more seconds, then she went back inside. The lobby security guard recognized her from the week and nodded without question when she badged through. The elevator came quickly this time, as if the building itself had decided not to make her wait. 42 floors. She spent them thinking about the expression on Celeste's face at the restaurant. Not the smile, which had been managed and deliberate, but the thing underneath the smile. The quick involuntary calculation she had seen in the woman's eyes before the performance snapped back into place. She had seen that expression before. In classrooms, in faculty meetings, in the faces of people who had just realized that someone else was a variable they hadn't accounted for. The elevator opened. The floor was quiet in its after-hours configuration, the overhead lighting dimmed, most of the desks empty. Down the corridor, the light under the interior office door was on. She knocked once and opened the door without waiting. Damon was at his desk, phone pressed to his ear, and he looked up when she walked in with the expression of a man who had been expecting a different kind of interruption. He said something clipped into the phone. "I'll call you back," and set it down. "You saw it," he said. Carmen forwarded it. "How much did she tell you?" "The headline. That's all I needed." Ava put her bag on the chair nearest the door and crossed her arms. "Tell me what's actually happening." Damon pushed back from the desk. He stood and moved to the window, which was the same thing he'd done in the restaurant, put distance between himself and whatever he was about to say, as if the additional feet of floor would make the words cost less. The Series B was structured with standard board provisions. $12 million got her 1 seat and limited influence over executive decisions above a certain financial threshold. But the clause about executive conduct is broad. He turned from the window. Broad enough that, interpreted aggressively, it could be used to call a review of leadership decisions, including personnel decisions. "Personnel decisions," Ava repeated. "You mean me?" He didn't answer, which was an answer. "Damon," she kept her voice level, "you need to say it out loud. The optics of—" He stopped, tried again. If it looks like I used a corporate placement to reconnect with someone I have a personal history with, and if Celeste decides to characterize that as a conflict of, I came here through an agency, Ava said. Carmen was sick. I had nothing to do with, I know that. Then why does it matter what it looks like? Because in a board review, what it looks like is the only thing that matters. His voice had an edge now, not at her, or not entirely at her, more the edge of a man who has been here before, in some form, the specific bitterness of someone who understands exactly how a situation can be weaponized without being false. She's been looking for leverage for 6 months. I didn't give her any. Until I walked in. He looked at her. The silence was not gentle. This is not your fault, he said. I want to be very clear about that. I know it's not my fault. Ava uncrossed her arms. What I'm trying to understand is whether you knew, when you asked me to lunch today, that she was already watching. Something shifted in his expression, not guilt exactly, more like the wince of someone who has been caught making a decision they knew was not entirely clean at the time of making it. Damon, I knew she'd been tracking my schedule. He said it flat and direct, which she gave him credit for. I didn't know she was going to move this fast. So you knew there was risk, and you did it anyway. Yes. Ava picked up her bag. I'm not leaving, she said, reading his expression. I'm thinking. She moved to the chair across from his desk and sat down, and the shift from standing to sitting changed something about the quality of the room, made it less like a confrontation and more like a meeting. She put her bag in her lap. What does the filing actually do, practically? He came back to the desk, sat. The CEO posture returned not because he was hiding behind it, but because this was what he did when he was solving a problem. He organized himself around it. It triggers a mandatory review period, 30 days. During that time, the board meets, reviews the conduct claim, and decides whether to proceed to a formal hearing. And if they proceed, then the scope of the review expands and the press gets wind of it, and the company spends 6 weeks being publicly examined. Which costs you clients. Which costs us clients. Yes. What does she want? Ava said. Not the filing. The filing is a tool. What's the actual ask? Damon looked at the desk. A muscle in his jaw worked once. She wants a larger stake. She's been positioning for it for a year. The board refused in the last cycle because the terms weren't favorable. This is her workaround. And if you give her the larger stake, then she controls enough to push through decisions without full consensus, which means in 18 months, she effectively controls the company's direction. And if you don't, then we go through the review and hope the board holds. Will they? A pause that was longer than she would have preferred. 3 of the 7 are solid, he said. 2 are undecided. 1 I'm not sure about, and 1, he stopped. 1 what? 1 has been having dinner with Celeste twice a month for the last quarter. Ava sat with that for a moment. Okay, she said. Okay, I'm thinking. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the desk, at the city behind him through the window, at the geometry of the problem as it was actually shaped rather than as she'd assumed it was shaped 30 minutes ago on the sidewalk. You have 30 days. Yes. And she filed today because she saw us at lunch. Most likely. Which means she was already watching you closely enough to know where you were having lunch. Damon was quiet for a moment. We have a mutual contact at the restaurant. She had you followed, Ava said. He didn't disagree. How long has that been going on? I don't know. Ava stood up. She walked to the window and stood beside it, not looking out, looking at the glass itself, at the way the city reflected back in it at this angle. She came to the office 4 days ago, to see you. Yes. What did she say? In the office, the actual conversation. Damon leaned back in his chair. He looked like a man assembling something from parts he'd been hoping not to use. She told me the investment structure needed to evolve, that the company was at a stage where the terms of the Series B no longer reflected her level of exposure. She made it sound collegial, collaborative. He paused. She said we had an understanding. Did you? Not the one she meant. Ava turned from the window. What did you say to her? I said I'd bring it to the board, which she took as a no. Which it was. The look on his face when he said it, The particular flatness of a man stating a fact about himself that is also a statement about his values, did something to the wall Ava had been maintaining between what had happened in this building over the last week and what she was going to do about it. The wall didn't fall, but something in its foundation shifted. "I need to tell you something," she said. He waited. I'm not back." She said it carefully, watching his face. "Whatever today was at lunch, I'm not there yet. I can't be there yet. That's going to require things from you that are going to take more than a restaurant conversation to establish. And I need you to understand that." "I understand that. But," she picked up her bag, "I also know what it looks like when someone is trying to take something from a person who built it honestly. And I'm not going to just walk away from that because it's cleaner." Something in his expression broke slightly at the word honestly and reformed itself, carefully. "You don't have to," he started. "I know I don't have to." She moved toward the door. "I'm saying I don't want to. There's a difference." She stopped with her hand on the door frame. "I'll call you tomorrow. Not about the company, about us. But tonight you need to deal with this, and I need to go home and sleep, because I haven't slept properly in 6 days, and I cannot have whatever conversation we need to have when I'm running on 5 hours in adrenaline." Damon stood. "Ava." She stopped. "Thank you," he said. Not the trained thank you she'd heard from him across the desk all week. This one came from somewhere lower and less managed. She looked at him. "Don't thank me yet," she said, and left. She slept 9 hours and woke up feeling like something that had been wrung out and left to dry. Her apartment was small and overlit in the morning, the kind of place that showed you its limitations in direct sunlight. The stack of papers on the table that hadn't moved in weeks, the chair in the corner with the sweater she'd been meaning to fold for 10 days, the window that looked at the brick wall of the adjacent building 4 feet away. It was a good apartment. It had been sufficient. She had built her life to fit it. She stood at the sink making coffee and thought about the 42nd floor with its floor-to-ceiling windows and its view of the whole glittering spread of the city. She thought about the way he'd said honestly. She called him at 9. He picked up on the first ring, which told her he'd been awake for hours. "The board member," she said without preamble. "The one having dinner with Celeste. Who is it?" A pause. "Ava, I'm not asking out of curiosity. I'm asking because if I'm going to help you think through this, I need the full picture." "Warren Elias," he said. "He's been on the board since year 2. He was one of my early supporters. And now he's having dinner with the woman who wants to restructure your board. It might be social." "It's not social," she said. A silence. "No," he said. "Probably not." "Have you talked to him?" "Not since the filing." "Talk to him today." "Not about the filing. About something else entirely. Something real. Something that reminds him you're a person and not just a liability calculation. And then listen very carefully to how he responds." A pause. I spent 3 years in academic departments, Damon. I know what institutional loyalty sounds like when it's starting to rot." A silence that was different from the others. Warmer, somehow. And she had not expected that and found that she resented it slightly, the way your body responds to warmth when you've been cold long enough that warmth has started to seem like a trick. "I'll call him this morning," Damon said. "Good." She poured her coffee. "Now, can we talk about something that isn't the company for 10 minutes? "Yes." She sat down at the kitchen table. The brick wall outside her window was a pale orange in the morning light. "I want to know what the first year was like," she said. "After you left. I want to hear it from you." A long pause. "Ava, I'm not asking to punish you. I'm asking because I spent 3 years with a version of the story that I made up. Because I had no other material, and I need to replace it with something true." Another pause. Then, quietly, "Okay." He talked for almost 20 minutes. She didn't interrupt. He told her about the first apartment, a studio in Pilsen, 350 square feet, heat that worked only intermittently, a neighbor who kept a dog that howled. He told her about the warehouse job, the overnight shifts, the specific physical exhaustion of that kind of work after years of doing only academic labor, how his body took 3 weeks to stop hurting and then just hurt differently. He told her about his father, who had not been able to recover emotionally from the collapse of what he'd built. Not broken, exactly, but diminished in a way that was permanent, something gone from his eyes that hadn't come back. He told her about the investor, Marcus Chen, a man who showed up at the warehouse to visit his cousin and ended up talking to Damon for 2 hours at the end of a shift because something in the way Damon talked about markets had made him stop leaving. How that conversation had become monthly dinners. How Marcus had eventually said, with the casual certainty of someone who had done this before, "I'll give you 100,000 in 90 days. Show me something." He had shown him something. "Did you ever—" Ava stopped, started over. "Were you ever going to contact me? Before this week?" A silence. "I thought about it," he said, "more times than I could count. But I'd told myself the story enough times that I believed it. That you were better off. That you'd built something good, and I would only—" He stopped. "That I would only disrupt it." "The choice of whether to be disrupted was mine to make," she said. "I know that now." "You knew it then too," she said, not cruelly, just exactly. He didn't deny it. "Okay," she said. "That's enough for today." "Ava, I'm not cutting it off. I just meant that's enough truth for one morning. I need to process it in pieces or I'll drown in it." She drank her coffee. "Call Elias. Let me know what he says." She hung up. She sat at the kitchen table for a while. Then she opened her laptop and spent 2 hours doing what she did when she needed to understand something she couldn't reach emotionally. She researched. Celeste Vaughn, the investment history, the public record, the board positions, the pattern of her portfolio. What she found was meticulous and slightly cold. A woman who invested in companies at inflection points and almost always came out having gained more influence than she'd entered with. Not illegal, not even unusual in that world, but consistent, like a signature. She also found 3 mentions of Damon Blackwood's name in Celeste's public interviews from the previous year. All flattering, all framed in the language of mentorship and shared vision. All containing, in Ava's reading, the faint possessiveness of someone who had conflated professional investment with personal claim. At noon, her phone rang. "Damon." "How was Elias?" she said. "Careful." His voice was tight. "He was careful in a way he's never been careful with me before." Which means she's already talked to him." Ava was quiet. "She's moving faster than I expected," Damon said. "The 30-day window is standard, but if she can get 3 votes lined up before the board convenes, the review becomes a formality. She doesn't need 30 days. She needs 3 phone calls." "Can you get to the 2 undecided members before she does?" "I'm meeting one of them tonight. The other is traveling until Thursday. Thursday is 5 days." "I'm aware." "What about legal? Can you challenge the filing on the grounds of Marcus is already on it?" A pause. "The conduct clause is broad, but it's not unlimited. The question is whether her characterization of the placement holds up. And that depends on—" He stopped. "On whether I'm willing to corroborate," Ava said. Silence. "I wasn't going to ask you to—" "You don't have to ask me," she said. "I'll talk to your legal team. The placement was legitimate. The agency can verify the timeline and Carmen's sick leave. There's nothing to hide because nothing happened." She paused. "Nothing happened in an official capacity, which is the only capacity that matters for the filing." "Ava." His voice was low, and something in it was raw in a way he clearly hadn't intended. "Don't," she said, not unkind. "Let's just solve the problem in front of us, and then let's just solve the problem." She heard him exhale. "Tonight," he said, "after the meeting with the board member, can we talk?" "Yes," she said. The meeting that evening was at a private club on the north side. The kind of place with leather chairs and an unwritten dress code and lighting that existed specifically to make people feel important. Ava wasn't there. It wasn't her meeting, and she hadn't been invited, and that was correct. She was at her apartment, laptop open, going through everything she could find about the board's composition and voting history. Damon texted her at 9:47 p.m. Bad. She called immediately. He picked up before the first ring finished. She could hear street noise. He was outside, walking, the cold of the evening in his voice. "Harper flipped," he said. "One of the undecided. She's committing to support the review." "How sure are you?" "She told me directly, diplomatically, but directly." Ava set down her coffee. "That's 2. With Elias, potentially 3. "Yes." which means the review proceeds regardless of what your solid three do. Yes, the street noise continued in the background. She heard a cab door close somewhere nearby. What did Celeste offer them? Ava said. I don't know exactly, but Harper mentioned that there was a concern about the company's long-term direction, about whether the current leadership had the objectivity necessary to navigate the next growth phase. He said it with a flatness that told her he was controlling something. Those aren't Harper's words. Harper doesn't talk like that. She's using them as a microphone, Ava said. Yes. So she's not just going after your board position. She's going after your judgment, your credibility. Ava was thinking out loud now, moving through it. She wants the narrative to be that you're compromised, that there's a personal entanglement affecting your professional decisions, and she's going to use me as the evidence. Silence. I think so, Damon said. Yes. Ava stood up from her table and walked to the window. The brick wall outside was dark now, a single light in the window across the narrow gap. Someone else's kitchen. Someone else's evening. Then she's going to come after me directly, she said. At some point. To make the story stick, she needs me to look like something I'm not. Or she needs to find something real to work with. She paused. Is there anything real, Damon? Anything I don't know about that she could actually use? A pause that was too long. Damon, the night before you arrived, he said. Monday morning. Carmen called in sick Sunday evening, and the agency notified me of the placement change before I left the office. Ava was very still. You knew before I arrived, she said. Yes. You knew it was me specifically. The agency sent your name and file as standard notification. She processed this. The geometry of it. 7 days of watching him perform surprise, perform professionalism, perform the careful management of someone encountering the unexpected. And you didn't... She stopped. You didn't redirect the placement. No. You could have. Yes. The silence between them was the longest of the week. So from the very beginning, she said slowly, you knew I was coming. Yes. And you let it happen. His voice, when it came, was stripped of everything practiced. I couldn't not let it happen, he said. I tried to think of the reason I should redirect it, and I couldn't find one that wasn't just fear, and He stopped. I am so tired of making decisions out of fear. Ava held the phone. Outside the window, the light in the neighboring kitchen went off. She'll find out you knew, Ava said. If she's thorough enough, and she is, she'll get the agency notification timestamp, and she'll use it. That changes the story from a coincidental meeting to a deliberate one. I know. Which means the filing stops being just leverage. It becomes a genuine case. I know, he said again. I know exactly what I did, and I know what it costs, and A breath. Something in it unsteady in a way she had never heard from him before, not even when they were young and broke and building things out of nothing. I would do it again, he said quietly. I need you to know that. I'm not saying it was right. I'm saying I would make the same choice again, and I need to at least be honest about that. Ava said nothing for a very long time. The dark brick wall outside her window, the absent light, the city's low continuous noise. I have to go, she said finally. Ava, I'll call you tomorrow. Her voice was even, constructed, but even. I just need to sit with this tonight. She hung up. She sat in her apartment with the lights on and the laptop open and the city going about its business outside, and she thought about the notification timestamp and what Celeste Vaughn could do with it, and what it meant that Damon had seen her name on a document and made a choice. And underneath all of that thinking, quieter and more dangerous, she thought about what it meant that when she tried to be angry about it, properly, cleanly angry, the way the situation objectively called for, what she mostly felt instead was something that terrified her far more than anger. She understood it. She understood exactly why he had done it. And she understood that she would have done the same thing, and that was the most frightening sentence she had formed all week. Her phone buzzed. Not Damon. A number she didn't recognize. She stared at it for one ring, two. On the third, something in her, the same part that had walked back into that building on a sidewalk outside after seeing the news alert, the part that apparently hadn't learned anything from 3 years of careful reconstruction, answered it. Miss Morales. The voice was Celeste Vaughn's, smooth and precise and containing, just barely, the particular warmth of a woman who had gotten exactly where she intended to be. I think it's time we, Ms. Morales. Celeste Vaughn's voice on the phone was the kind of smooth that took years to develop. Not natural smoothness, but the kind that gets built over deliberate practice, over hundreds of rooms where being anything other than controlled would have cost something. I think it's time we had a conversation without Damon in the middle of it. Ava did not move from where she was standing at the window. How did you get this number? She said. The agency file is more accessible than people assume. A pause, brief and unapologetic. I'm not calling to threaten you, Ms. Morales. I want you to understand that before we go further. I'm calling because I think you deserve information that Damon hasn't given you. I'm listening, Ava said. Her voice came out flat, and she was glad. Can we meet? Tomorrow morning. Somewhere neutral. Your choice of location. Every reasonable part of Ava's brain assembled the case against this. The call was unsolicited. The woman on the other end of the line had filed legal paperwork 3 hours ago designed to destabilize the professional life of someone Ava cared about, whatever complicated shape that caring currently occupied. Nothing Celeste Vaughn wanted to tell her was going to be disinterested information. 7:30, Ava said. Lena's on Wabash. I'll be there until 8. A pause that felt like reassessment. I'll see you then. The call ended. Ava stood at the window for a long time after. She did not call Damon. She thought about calling Damon. She decided that whatever Celeste was going to say deserved to be heard without Damon's version of it already installed in her head, because the entire problem with the last week was that she had been operating inside other people's framings of events, and she was done with that. She went to bed at 11. She did not sleep until nearly 2. Lena's was a corner coffee shop on Wabash that Ava had been going to for 2 years. Good coffee, booths with high backs, a counter staff who didn't make conversation unless you invited it. She arrived at 7:20, ordered, took the booth at the far end where the light came from the window on the left and you could see the whole room. She had her coffee and her hands around it, and she was watching the door when Celeste came in at 7:31. Same precision as the office. Dark coat, understated jewelry, the carriage of someone who had decided long ago that rooms were things you entered rather than joined. She scanned the space, found Ava, and came directly to the booth without stopping at the counter. She sat down. She looked at Ava with an expression that was, for the first time since Ava had encountered her, not performing anything. It was just a face. A tired one, around the eyes, in a way that the presentation had previously concealed. Thank you for meeting me, Celeste said. I haven't decided yet whether it was a good idea, Ava said. What did you want to tell me? Celeste folded her hands on the table. How much has Damon told you about how the company was financed? The early stages. He told me about Marcus Chen. Marcus was the first round, Celeste said. Series A, small and contained, the way early rounds usually are. What Damon may not have detailed is the period between Series A and the point where the company became the thing it is now. That gap is about 18 months. And 18 months is a long time when a company is burning through cash, and the product isn't quite where it needs to be, and the team is under pressure that would break most organizations. Ava drank her coffee and said nothing. I came in during that gap, Celeste said. Not as Series B, that came later, with the formal structure and the board provisions. Before that, informally. She paused. Damon needed $4 million to survive a product crisis that would have ended the company. He needed it in 72 hours, and he needed it without the kind of documentation that would have frightened the other early investors. I gave it to him. Ava kept her face still. I gave it to him, Celeste said again, because I believed in the company, but also because he asked me in a way that made me believe I was... She stopped. Something moved across her expression, brief and not entirely managed. He was very good at making people feel like they were the only one who could help, like what they were doing was uniquely important. And in exchange, Ava said, a verbal agreement, Celeste said, nothing documented, which was my mistake, and I knew it was my mistake at the time. And I made it anyway because, she looked at the table, because the situation had a certain emotional charge that I allowed to override my professional judgment, which I have never done before and have not done since. Ava sat very still. He told me, Celeste said carefully, That when the company reached stability, we would revisit the terms of my involvement, that the informal arrangement would become formal in a way that reflected what I had actually contributed. She looked up. That conversation never happened. The Series B was structured as if the informal 4 million had never existed, as if I had simply been a bridge he crossed and left behind. The coffee shop noise moved around them, the machine at the counter, someone's chair scraping, a door opening and closing. Ordinary sounds doing nothing to change the shape of the information now sitting on the table between them. "Why are you telling me this?" Ava said. "Because I want you to understand who you're protecting." "I'm not protecting anyone," Ava said. "I'm a temporary placement who happened to know the CEO. That's the whole story." Celeste looked at her with the expression of someone who is very tired of being told things that aren't true. "Miss Morales, I know when the agency sent the placement notification. I know what time Damon read it. I know he spent 11 minutes on the agency's website that evening before he made any decision about the placement. 11 minutes is not a man confirming paperwork. 11 minutes is a man deciding something." The booth felt smaller than it had when Ava arrived. "That's not," she started. "I'm not interested in the legal version," Celeste said. "I'm interested in the real version, because the real version is the one that explains why a woman who was done with Damon Blackwood is sitting in this coffee shop at 7:30 in the morning defending a company she has no stake in." She paused. "He called you back in. You know he did. You know exactly what he did and why, and you've been trying to decide how angry to be about it since it happened." Ava put her coffee cup down. "What do you want?" she said. "Not aggressive. Exact." "I want what I was promised," Celeste said. "A 20% stake structured at the valuation from 18 months ago. It's less than what I'm owed if you account for the informal 4 million, honestly. It's a reasonable ask." "And the board filing?" "Goes away the moment the stake is formalized." "You're using me as a pressure point," Ava said. "I'm talking to you because you're the only person in Damon's life right now who he'll actually listen to, and because you deserve to know what he's capable of before you build anything on that foundation." She held Ava's gaze. "I'm not a villain in this story, Ms. Morales. I'm a woman who got handled by a man who is very talented at making people feel chosen and then discovered that being chosen was a temporary condition." Ava sat with that for a moment. "I'll need to verify what you're telling me," she said. "I expected that," Celeste said. She slid a manila envelope across the table. "The transfer records are in there. The amount, the date, the account. Everything's traceable if you know where to look, and I've made sure you know where to look." Ava looked at the envelope. She did not pick it up immediately. "If this is real," she said, "then Damon needs to answer for it, directly, not through a board filing." "Agreed," Celeste said. "But Damon has had 18 months to answer for it voluntarily, and he hasn't. Some people only answer when the alternative is worse." Ava picked up the envelope. She left the coffee shop at 8:04 and stood on Wabash in the cold, with the envelope in her hand and the L running overhead and the whole enormous apparatus of the city going about its morning. She called Damon. He picked up immediately, same as yesterday. "I need you to come to my apartment," she said. "Now." A pause. "What happened?" "Now, Damon." He was there in 35 minutes, which told her he had not been far. She buzzed him up without speaking through the intercom, and had the envelope open on her kitchen table when he knocked. He came in. He saw her face first, then the documents on the table. Something in his expression changed. Not surprise, she noted. Not the jump of a man who has no idea what he's looking at. More the particular stillness of someone who has been braced for something and has now confirmed it has arrived. "Sit down," she said. He sat. $4 million, she said. Informal. Undocumented. 72 hours. 18 months before the Series B. He looked at the documents. "Where did you get these?" "She called me last night. We met this morning." She watched his face. "You knew this was in her arsenal." "Yes," he said. "You knew and you didn't tell me." "I was trying to—" "Don't tell me you were trying to protect me," she said. Her voice stayed level, but only because she was actively constructing the levelness, brick by brick. "Do not tell me that." He stopped. "Is it real?" she said. "The 4 million, the verbal agreement. Is it real?" His jaw worked. He looked at the table. Then, with the particular quality of a man who has just run out of angles, "Yes." The word landed in the kitchen and took up all the available space. You made her a promise, Ava said. It wasn't. He stopped again, tried again. The conversation was less formal than she's characterizing. There was no specific. Damon, her voice cut clean. Did you tell her that her contribution would be recognized when the company stabilized? A silence. Yes, he said. And did you recognize it? The Series B terms were fair market. That's not what I asked. He pressed his hands flat on the table. He looked like a man dismantling something he'd spent a long time building. No, he said, not in the way she expected. Ava walked to the window. The brick wall, the narrow gap, the same view she'd been staring at for 2 years, the same compressed and limited perspective. So there are two things, she said. There's the filing, which she's using as leverage because you didn't keep a promise, and there's what the filing is about, which is me, which you manufactured by letting the placement go forward after you knew my name was on it. She turned. And you're standing in my kitchen right now because both of those things happened, and you're asking me to help you navigate the consequences. I'm not asking you to. You're here, she said. You came when I called. That's an ask. He looked at her. I know what I did, he said. The CEO voice was entirely gone. There was nothing professional left in the room. I know what I did with the placement, and I know what I didn't do for Celeste, and I know that both of those things are sitting in front of you right now, and they look like a pattern, because they are a pattern. He exhaled. I handle things by managing them instead of facing them. I make decisions that are about fear and call them something else. I've been doing it since I was 22 years old, and I disappeared, and I've been doing it every day since, and... He stopped. His voice had gone rough at the edges in a way that had nothing performed about it. I don't know how to stop doing it except to stop, right now, in front of you, which is the most terrifying thing I can think of. Ava looked at him for a long time. She wants 20%, she said, structured at the 18-month-old valuation. That would cost the company. I know what it would cost. Is it less than what she's owed if the $4 million is accounted for honestly? A pause. Yes, he said, quiet. Probably yes. Then it's not extortion, Ava said. It's a debt. Something in his expression broke and reformed in a way she had not seen before. Not the crack in a wall, but the actual removal of one, just a section of it, just enough to see through. If I give her the stake, he said, the filing goes away. That's what she said. And you believe her? Ava thought about the face across the booth. The tiredness around the eyes, the envelope pushed across the table without theater. Yes, she said. I think she's a businesswoman who got handled and wants what she was promised. I don't think she enjoys this. Damon was quiet for a moment. Then, if I do this, if I go to the board and restructure the stake, it looks like I'm caving under pressure. The narrative becomes that the filing had merit. The filing did have merit, Ava said. That's the problem. He looked at her. You can manage the narrative or you can do the right thing, she said. You keep picking narrative management. Look where it's gotten you. The silence in the kitchen was the kind that changes rooms, changes the people in them, slightly, irrevocably. Outside, the L ran past with its deep metallic complaint, and the sound faded and the kitchen was quiet again. Damon put his face in his hands. Not for long, just long enough to make it true. Then he lifted his head. I need to call Marcus, he said. Yes, she said. He took out his phone. He looked at her. Are you? He stopped. I know I don't have the right to ask where we are. No, she said. You don't. Not today. He nodded. He dialed Marcus. Ava went to the window. The call lasted 12 minutes. She listened to his half of it without trying to make sense of the legal and financial specifics, tracking instead the quality of his voice, the way it shifted when he was being cornered, and the way it shifted again when he made the decision, the specific register of a man choosing exposure over management, maybe for the first time. When he hung up, he sat at her kitchen table with the phone in both hands. Marcus is calling the board by noon, he said, proposing a voluntary restructure before the formal review. It'll take 2 weeks to formalize, but the filing gets suspended pending resolution. Ava turned from the window. Okay, she said. Okay, he repeated, as if testing the word, as if he'd expected something else and wasn't sure what to do with the absence of it. Then her phone rang. She looked at the screen. An unknown number, but a different unknown from Celeste's. Chicago area code. She almost didn't answer. She answered, "Ms. Morales." A man's voice, clipped and professional and somehow familiar in a way she couldn't immediately place. "My name is Warren Elias. I'm a board member at Blackwood Dynamics. I apologize for the direct contact. I got your number from the agency file, which I'll acknowledge is not entirely above board." A brief pause. "I need to speak with you about something that has nothing to do with the filing." Ava looked at Damon across the kitchen. He had gone very still. "I'm listening," she said. "There's something you need to know about Celeste Vaughn," Elias said. "Something that changes the shape of everything you think you understand about the last 48 hours. A pause. "The $4 million she gave Damon Blackwood 18 months before the Series B." Ava's hand tightened on the phone. "It wasn't hers," Elias said. The kitchen was very quiet. "What do you mean it wasn't hers?" Ava said. "I mean, the $4 million came from a fund," Elias said. "A fund with 3 other partners. Partners who have no idea their money was deployed that way. Who have no idea an informal agreement was made on their behalf. And who, and this is the part you need to understand, who have been looking for that money for 14 months. A pause. "Miss Morales, Celeste Vaughn didn't just make an undocumented investment. She embezzled from her own partners to do it. And the reason she needs that 20% stake formalized so urgently, the reason she needs it right now, this week, not next month, is that she's running out of time to make the math work before her partners audit the fund." Ava stared at the brick wall outside the window. "If Damon gives her the stake," Elias said, "she can liquidate enough to cover the shortfall before anyone looks too closely. But if he doesn't, then the audit happens," Ava said. Her voice came out strange, distant from herself. "Then the audit happens," Elias confirmed. "And then everything comes out, including what she did to his company, including the filing, including all of it." A pause. "I'm telling you this because I've been doing the wrong thing for 3 weeks, and I have a limited window to do the right one. And because Damon Blackwood built something real in this city, and I'm not going to watch Celeste Vaughn burn it down to cover her own mistakes." Ava looked at Damon. He was watching her face, reading it, and she could see the moment he understood from her expression that whatever was happening on the phone was not what either of them had prepared for. "Give me an hour," she said to Elias. She hung up. She set the phone on the table. The morning light in the kitchen fell across the documents Celeste had given her. The transfer records, the account numbers, the careful paper architecture of a woman covering her tracks, and Ava looked at them with completely new eyes, seeing not evidence of Damon's debt, but the scaffolding of someone else's. Ava put the phone down on the table and looked at Damon and said, "Don't call Marcus back yet." He looked at her. "What happened?" She told him. She told him all of it. Elias, the fund, the 3 partners, the audit timeline, the 14 months of missing money. She told it flat and without editorializing, watching his face the way you watch a building take impact, tracking the sequence of it, the initial incomprehension, the moment comprehension arrived, the moment it settled into something colder and more dangerous than shock. When she finished, Damon was very still. "She embezzled," he said, "according to Elias. And the $4 million she gave me wasn't hers to give." He stood up from the table. He walked to the window, her brick wall, her narrow gap, and put one hand against the frame and looked at nothing. "Which means the verbal agreement I made with her was made with someone who had no right to make the offer," Ava said. "Which means the debt isn't yours, or not in the way she's been framing it. But the money is still in the company." "Yes. So the partners are owed something," Ava said, "just not by the mechanism she's been trying to use to collect it." Damon turned from the window. The morning light hit his face at an angle that showed everything the corporate presentation usually concealed. The exhaustion that lived deeper than last night, the specific aging that came from years of carrying weight in silence. He looked like a man who had just watched the entire architecture of a problem he thought he understood reveal a completely different structure underneath. "She was going to make me formalize a stake," he said slowly, "using my own money to cover her theft." "Yes. And the filing, the conduct review, that was the lever." If you gave her the stake to make the filing go away, she liquidates enough to cover the shortfall before the audit hits. Her partners never find out. And you spend the next decade with a board member who has leverage over you that never expires. Ava sat down at the table. It's clean, actually, as schemes go. Don't, he said. I'm not admiring it, I'm understanding it. There's a difference. She pulled the envelope toward her and looked at the documents again with the new frame installed. Transfer records, yes. Account numbers, yes. But whose accounts? From which fund? Elias has documentation? He said so. Have you met with him recently? In person? 3 weeks ago, before any of this. Call him back. Tell him you need to meet today. Bring Marcus. She looked up. And Damon? Don't tell him everything on the phone. Not because I don't trust Elias, but because phones leave records. And right now, the only advantage you have is that Celeste doesn't know you know. Something shifted in his expression. The paralysis of the last 3 minutes began reorganizing itself into something operational. She had seen this happen in the office, the moment he stopped absorbing a problem and started solving it. But she had not seen it this close, this stripped of professional packaging, and it was different here, more human, more costly. Okay, he said. He called Elias. 3 minutes, controlled, specific. Meeting this afternoon, Marcus Chen present, bring everything you have. Elias agreed without hesitation, which told Ava that the man had been ready for this call, had maybe been hoping for it. When Damon hung up, he looked at her. You should come, he said. Why? Because you're the one who received this information. Because if this goes to any kind of legal or board proceeding, your account of the sequence of events matters. A pause. And because I don't want to walk into this without you. The last sentence was quieter than the others. Ava looked at the table. Okay, she said. They met Elias and Marcus at Marcus's office in the West Loop at 2 in the afternoon. The office was the functional opposite of Blackwood Dynamics. Smaller, denser, walls lined with whiteboards covered in numbers and diagrams that had clearly been up for months. The accumulated cartography of someone who thought in systems. Marcus Chen was 50, compact, with the specific alertness of a man who processed information faster than most people produced it. He shook Ava's hand with the directness of someone who had been told who she was and decided that fact was useful rather than complicated. Elias was already there when they arrived. He was in his late 60s, silver-haired, wearing the kind of suit that had been expensive 15 years ago and had been worn enough since to look like a second skin. He stood when they walked in and looked at Damon with an expression that contained, underneath the professional gravity, something that looked like genuine shame. I should have come to you 3 weeks ago, he said. Yes, Damon said. Not angry, just exact. Sit down, Marcus said, and they sat, all 4 of them, around the conference table in the corner of the office, with Elias's documents spread across its surface. The documents were thorough. Ava had expected thorough. Elias hadn't struck her as someone who would call with half a case, but the depth of it was something else. Fund transfer records, internal audit communications, email chains between Celeste and her partners that contained enough ellipsis and careful phrasing to tell the story of a woman managing an increasingly dangerous gap between what her partners knew and what was actually true. 14 months of it. A paper trail that had been building toward this point with the slow inevitability of water finding a crack. The $4 million had come from a real estate development fund. 3 partners, a combined portfolio of north of $40 million, structured with the kind of institutional language that made unauthorized withdrawals not just a breach of trust, but a criminal matter. Celeste had moved the money through 2 intermediate accounts before it reached Damon's company, which had given her 14 months of clean daylight. But the fund's annual audit was scheduled for the end of the following month, and the numbers had been deteriorating for longer than that. She needed the stake formalized this week, Marcus said, reading the timeline. Not next month. Not after the board meeting, this week. Because the audit examines the current period's activity, Elias said. If she can show a formal equity stake, a legitimate asset, it reconstructs the paper trail. The $4 million becomes an investment that appreciated rather than a theft that needed covering. And the 20% stake at the 18-month valuation, Damon said. At that number, it's worth approximately $6.8 million, Marcus said. He had the figure ready. He had clearly been doing this math for hours. She invested $4 million of other people's money and was going to extract $6.8 million of yours to cover it. Net gain of $2.8 million and a clean audit. The room was quiet for a moment. What do we do? Damon said. The question was directed at no one specific, which meant it was directed at the room, at the collective intelligence of 4 people sitting around a table with a problem that had a narrow window and significant consequences in every direction. If we take this to the fund's partners directly, Ava said, what happens to the board filing? It gets complicated, Elias said. The filing was made by an individual who will shortly be under investigation for fraud. The board has grounds to suspend it pending resolution of her legal situation. But that process takes time, and during the suspension period, the company is still in a kind of limbo. What if the board votes to reject the filing before it goes to a formal review? Marcus said. If we can get 4 votes, your 3 solids plus Elias, we can close the review window before it opens. The filing dies administratively. Harper, Damon said. She's already committed to supporting the review. Harper committed based on what Celeste told her, Ava said, which was a version of events that doesn't account for the fraud. She looked at Damon. If Harper knows what Celeste actually is, does she hold the commitment? Damon looked at the table. I don't know. Then we find out, Ava said. She looked at her watch. It was 3:15. When does the board formally receive the filing? It was filed yesterday, Elias said. The 30-day review clock started this morning. So we have 30 days on paper, Marcus said. But practically we have until Celeste realizes we know, Ava said, which means we have today. The 3 men looked at her. She doesn't know about Elias's call, Ava continued. She doesn't know what we have. Right now, she thinks she has Damon cornered. The filing is in motion. She has 2 board votes, and she has enough on the placement to make the narrative hold. She's waiting for him to call and accept her terms. She looked at Damon. Has she contacted you today? A text this morning, asking for a call. Don't answer it yet. What are you thinking? Marcus said. Ava looked at the documents on the table, the transfer records, the email chains, the 14 months of careful management and the single point of vulnerability where it all came apart. She has to believe everything is proceeding on her timeline until the moment it isn't, she said. If she knows we have this, she moves. She gets to the partners first. She controls the narrative. She makes Elias the problem instead of the solution. She looked at Elias. How quickly can the fund's partners be notified? Officially. Through legal channels. Elias looked at Marcus. I have a securities attorney on retainer, Marcus said slowly. If we're talking about notifying third parties of potential fraud, how quickly? Ava said again. If I call him in the next hour, Marcus said, and if Elias signs a statement today, we could have a formal notification to the fund's partners by close of business. Do it, Damon said. Marcus picked up his phone and left the room. Elias looked at Damon. There will be questions about the $4 million on your end, he said. The company received funds from an irregular source. Even if you didn't know, I'll deal with that, Damon said. Whatever I owe the fund, I'll deal with it directly. He said it without hesitation, and Ava felt something in her chest shift at the sound of it. The specific note of a man who had decided to stop managing his debts and start paying them. Marcus came back in 12 minutes. Soren's on it. He needs Elias in his office by 5. He looked at Elias. I'll be there, Elias said. What about Harper? Damon said. Ava looked at him. I'll talk to Harper. You don't know Harper? No, but I'm the one Celeste made into a story, which means I'm the one who can unmake it. She held his gaze. Harper committed to supporting a review based on a conduct narrative. If I walk in there as myself, not the narrative, me, and tell her what actually happened this week, she can decide with real information. Damon was quiet for a moment. She's going to ask why you're involved. Because I am involved, Ava said. That's the answer. I'm involved because I know this man, and because someone used me as a prop in a scheme, and I have something to say about that. Something moved across his face. He didn't speak. Text me Harper's contact, she said. He took out his phone. She called Harper from the street outside Marcus's building while Damon and Marcus were still inside working through the legal sequence with Soren over a conference call. Harper picked up on the 3rd ring. A woman's voice, careful and professional. The timbre of someone who recognized an unknown number and answered it anyway out of the specific anxiety of not knowing what it was. Ms. Harper, my name is Ava Morales. I was a temporary placement at Blackwood Dynamics this past week. I apologize for the direct contact. Warren Elias gave me your number. A pause. I know who you are, Harper said. Ava expected something colder. The tone was more uncertain than cold, which meant there was room. I'd like to meet with you this afternoon if you're available, Ava said. An hour, your choice of location. Miss Morales, the board filing is a formal... I'm not calling about the filing, Ava said. I'm calling about what's behind it. And I think when you hear the full picture, you'll understand why I needed to reach you today specifically. A silence. 4 o'clock, Harper said. My office on Michigan. I'll be there, Ava said. She went back inside and told Damon. He looked at her for a moment. You're doing a lot, he said. Quiet. Yes, she said. I want to... Later, she said. We deal with this first. Harper's office was on the 14th floor of a building on Michigan Avenue with a view of the lake that even in the gray of late afternoon was enormous and moving. Harper herself was in her mid-50s, a compact woman with short natural hair and eyes that had clearly spent decades assessing people across tables, and were doing so now with Ava with the specific focus of someone who was reassessing something they'd already decided. Ava sat down and told her the truth. All of it, in sequence, from the agency placement to the restaurant lunch, to Celeste's phone call to the coffee shop this morning, to the documents and what they showed. She did not editorialize. She did not perform emotion. She laid it out the way she had laid out academic arguments for years, evidence, sequence, implication, and she watched Harper's face process it in real time. When she finished, the office was quiet. Harper looked at the lake. You have the transfer documentation, she said. Marcus Chen's legal team has it. And Elias is making a formal statement. He's with the attorney now. Harper turned from the lake. Why are you doing this? She said. It wasn't hostile. It was the genuine question of a woman trying to understand a motivation that didn't fit the obvious categories. Because someone built something real, Ava said, and someone else was going to take it apart to cover a mistake. And I was supposed to be the mechanism. She held Harper's gaze. I don't like being a mechanism. A long pause. I need to make some calls, Harper said. I know, Ava said. She stood. Whatever you decide about the review, decide it with the real information. That's all I'm asking. She took the elevator down 14 floors and walked out onto Michigan Avenue into the early evening wind off the lake, cold and direct, and carrying the particular clarity of air that's been moving across open water for miles. She pulled her coat closed and started walking. Her phone rang. Damon. Where are you? He said. Michigan and Randolph. Just left Harper. How did it go? She's making calls. A pause. Soren filed the notification to the fund's partners 20 minutes ago, he said. It's done. Ava stopped walking. Around her, the evening traffic moved in its relentless northward and southward flows, the city indifferent and enormous and continuing. Then Celeste is going to find out. Probably within the hour, her partners will call her the moment they hear. And then she knows we moved first. Yes. Ava started walking again. Where are you? Outside your building, he said. I know I should have called first. Stay there, she said. I'll be 20 minutes. She walked fast, head down against the wind, through the early evening crowds of Michigan Avenue, past the lit storefronts and the knots of people and the particular ambient noise of a city that never fully modulated between day and night. She thought about the sequence of the day, the coffee shop at 7:30, the kitchen at 9, Marcus's office, Harper's office, the phone call on the street, all of it running inside of 12 hours, all of it moving at the velocity of something that had been building pressure for longer than a week, longer than 7 days of a temporary placement, longer maybe than the 3 years she'd spent not thinking about it. She turned onto her street and saw him. He was standing outside her building in his coat with his hands in his pockets, not on his phone, not performing anything, just standing on the sidewalk in the cold the way a person stands when they've run out of things to manage and they're waiting. Just waiting. She walked up to him. Did she call you? Ava said. 7 minutes ago. I didn't answer. She'll call again. I know. They stood on the sidewalk, looking at each other in the cold yellow light of the street lamp, the city moving behind them with its perpetual unconcern, and Ava felt the full weight of the day in her body. Not just today, all of the days, the 7 days in the building, and the 3 years before them, and the specific exhaustion of having spent most of her adult life managing the aftermath of something she'd never been given the chance to prevent. "Come upstairs," she said. They went up. In the apartment, she made coffee because it was something to do with her hands, and he sat at the kitchen table where the documents had been that morning and were no longer. She could feel him watching her. She didn't turn around. "Whatever happens with the board," he said, "I want you to know that I'm not asking you to—" "Damon," she turned. "Stop managing what you ask me. Just say what you mean." He looked at her. "I want you back," he said, plain and unmanaged, and with the specific quality of a man who has just put down something very heavy. "Not the 7 days, not the building. You. I want to—" He stopped. "I want to have the right to be outside your building when things go wrong. I want the right to be the person you call. I know I haven't earned that. I know it's going to take—" His phone rang. He looked at the screen. Celeste. He looked at Ava. She nodded. He answered. He put it on speaker and set it on the table between them, and the sound of Celeste Vaughn's voice filled the kitchen. But this time the smoothness was gone, fully and completely, replaced by something underneath it that was cold and stripped down to its actual nature, the voice of a woman who had just understood the shape of what had happened to her. "You went to my partner's," Celeste said. "Yes," Damon said. "Do you understand what you've done?" "I think so. You have no idea." The coldness sharpened. "I gave you $4 million when no one else would. I kept your company alive, and you gave me money that wasn't yours to give," Damon said. His voice was even. "And then you tried to make me pay it back with interest using a woman I care about as leverage." A pause. "So yes, I went to your partner's." A silence on the line. "The filing stands," Celeste said. "The filing loses its advocate when the board finds out you're under fraud investigation," Damon said. "Elias is already talking to Harper." Another silence. Longer this time. "This isn't over," Celeste said. "No," Damon said. "It probably isn't. But it's different now." He paused. "Good night, Celeste." He ended the call. The kitchen was very quiet. Ava looked at him across the table. "She said it isn't over," Ava said. "No." "What does she have left?" He was quiet for a moment. His hands were flat on the table, and his face had the specific quality of someone who has just spent the last 30 seconds calculating a threat and arriving at a number that is not 0. "The placement," he said. "If she can make the conduct review happen before the fraud investigation takes full shape, if she can move fast enough that the board is convened before her own situation becomes the story—" He stopped. "How fast can she move?" Ava said. "I don't know," he said. "Fast." He looked at her. "She needs one more vote. If she gets to someone before morning—" Ava's phone buzzed on the counter. Not a call, a text. From an unsaved number she didn't recognize. She picked it up. The text contained 4 words and an attachment. The 4 words were, "Check the agency file." The attachment was a screenshot. The agency's internal placement record, the kind of document that existed only in the agency's secured HR system that should have been accessible to no one outside the agency's internal staff. It showed Damon's name. It showed the timestamp of when he had accessed her file. It showed the 11 minutes. And beneath the screenshot in the thread, a second message arrived as she was reading the first. "The board meets at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Emergency session. I called it an hour ago. You won't have time to—" Ava read the text twice. The second time she read it, she was already moving, picking up her coat from the chair, checking the time on her phone, running the arithmetic of what 8 a.m. meant against what they currently had and what they still needed. 7:43 p.m. 12 hours and 17 minutes. "Emergency session," she said. She turned the phone so Damon could read the screen. He read it, his jaw set. She watched him do the calculation. The same calculation she'd just done, arriving at the same number, the same narrow window with the same insufficient content inside it. "She pulled the agency file," he said. which means she has someone inside the agency or someone who can access secured HR systems. Ava put her coat on. It doesn't matter how she got it. What matters is that she's going to walk into that boardroom tomorrow morning with a screenshot showing you accessed my file the night before the placement, and she's going to build the entire conduct narrative around those 11 minutes. The fraud documentation takes time to process. Legal notifications, partner responses, formal statements. None of that is finalized by 8 a.m. She picked up her bag. She knows that. That's why she called the emergency session tonight. She's racing the fraud investigation. Damon stood. If the board convenes before the investigation has traction, then the conduct review proceeds on her terms, and the fraud becomes a separate matter that gets handled separately. Ava looked at him. She's not stupid. She's cornered and she's moving fast, which is the most dangerous version of her. He was already on his phone. Marcus, not Marcus, Ava said. Elias. He looked at her. Elias called the emergency session tomorrow as a board member, she said, which means Elias has the standing to call a counter session, or to formally request a delay on procedural grounds, or to submit new material evidence that requires the board to postpone the review pending examination. She was thinking out loud and she knew it, and she let herself do it because the kitchen was small and the window was the brick wall and there was nobody here except the two of them and 12 hours. Call Elias. Tell him we need the board to receive the fraud documentation before the session opens. Not after. Before. If they walk into that room already knowing what Celeste is, the conduct review becomes impossible to sustain. Damon looked at her for one moment. Not calculating, not managing, just looking at her with the specific expression of a man who has just been reminded of something he'd forgotten about himself. Then he called Elias. Elias answered on the second ring. It was almost 8 p.m., and the man answered on the second ring, which told Ava everything she needed to know about whether Warren Elias was sleeping tonight. Damon talked. Elias listened. There was a back and forth that lasted 9 minutes, clipped and specific, both of them navigating the procedural landscape of emergency board sessions and evidentiary submissions with the fluency of people who had spent careers in rooms where these distinctions mattered. Ava listened and tracked the shape of it, what was possible, what wasn't, where the window was. When Damon hung up, he looked at her. Elias can submit the documentation as new material evidence tonight, he said. It goes into the board record before the session opens. Every member receives it at the same time, which means Celeste can't control who sees it first. Will that be enough to stop the session? Not stop it, but it changes what happens inside it. He set his phone on the counter. She can still call the review, she can still make the argument, but she's making it to a room that already knows she's under fraud investigation. And Harper? Ava said. Elias spoke to Harper an hour ago. A pause. Harper is withdrawing her support for the review. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. That's 3 votes, Ava said. Your 3 solids plus Elias. 4-2 if Elias holds. Will he hold? Damon looked at her with the directness of someone who has just decided to stop hedging. Yes, he said. He'll hold. Ava put her bag down. She sat at the kitchen table and pressed her fingers against the wood grain and looked at the surface of the table and thought about all the things that were now set in motion that could not be recalled. The fund notification, Elias's statement, Harper's withdrawal, the documentation entering the board record at some point in the next few hours. All of it moving forward now in the particular way that decisions moved when they became actions. Irreversible. Consequential. Real. She's still going to be in that room tomorrow, Ava said. Yes. And she's still going to use the screenshot. Yes. Ava looked up. Then I need to be there too. Damon was quiet. I'm not a board member, she said. I know that, but I'm the subject of the conduct claim. I have the right to address the board directly if the claim involves my conduct. She looked at him steadily. Does the conduct review claim involve me? The filing characterizes the placement as yes or no. Yes, he said. Then I have standing to request an address. She held his gaze. Call your attorney tonight. Get me in that room. He looked at her for a long moment. The kitchen light was unforgiving and the night outside the window was full dark, and they were 2 people sitting at a small table in a small apartment with a problem that was large and a window that was narrow and no version of tomorrow that didn't cost something. You don't have to do this, he said. I know I don't have to, she said, for the third time since this began. The same words, the same distinction. I don't want her to win with my face on her argument. That's my reason, not yours. He held her gaze. Okay, he said. He made the call. She didn't sleep much. She lay in the dark and listened to the city and thought about what she was going to say in the morning, not the exact words. She didn't work that way, had never been able to memorize prepared remarks without them dying in her mouth on delivery, but the shape of it, the true shape of what had happened and what it meant. She thought about the 11 minutes. She thought about what they actually were. Not a conspiracy, not a manipulation, but a man sitting alone in an office the night before everything changed, looking at a name on a screen and trying to find a reason not to let it. She thought about this fact that she understood it. At 6:15, she got up and made coffee and stood at the window in the early light. The brick wall was pale and ordinary in the morning gray. She had looked at this wall for 2 years and it had always been exactly what it was. A wall, 4 feet away, telling her nothing about anything beyond its own surface. She got dressed. Damon met her in the lobby of the Blackwood Dynamics building at 7:40. He was in a dark suit, fully assembled, the CEO exterior intact and professional. But when she walked in and he saw her, something in the professional exterior adjusted. Not disappeared, but made room for the man underneath it in a way she was learning to read as its own language. "How are you?" he said. "Ask me after," she said. They went up. The boardroom was on the 44th floor, 2 floors above the executive suite, a room Ava had not been in during her week on 42. It was larger than she'd expected. A long, oval table, seating for 12, floor-to-ceiling windows on the north and east walls, the city visible in every direction in the flat gray light of early morning. 7 people were already present when they arrived at 7:52. Ava recognized Elias, who met her eyes with a brief nod. She recognized Marcus, seated to Damon's right, compact and alert, and already holding a tablet with the documentation they'd filed the night before. She did not immediately look at Celeste. When she did look, she was ready. Celeste was seated at the far curve of the oval, 2 seats from the head position. She had the same precision as always, dark blazer, controlled posture, the presentation intact. But her eyes, when they found Ava across the table, contained something that had not been there in the coffee shop yesterday morning. Not fear, exactly. The specific alertness of a person who has just registered that the room is not configured the way they planned. She looked at Ava for 3 seconds. Then she looked at the table in front of her, and the calibration happened visibly, rapidly. The new information being integrated, the revised strategy forming. The session opened at 8 o'clock precisely. The board chair, a woman named Aldridge, who ran the proceedings with the focused neutrality of someone who had no personal stake in the outcome and intended to keep it that way, opened by acknowledging that new material evidence had been submitted to the record overnight and that each member had received copies before the session opened. She did not characterize the evidence. She noted it existed and moved to the formal agenda. Celeste's attorney, who was present remotely on a screen at the room's north end, stated the filing's position clearly and without theater. A conduct review was warranted based on evidence that the CEO had used a corporate placement process to facilitate personal contact with an individual with whom he had prior intimate history, constituting a conflict of interest that bore on his professional judgment. The screenshot was presented. The 11 minutes, the timestamp, the agency file. Ava watched the room receive it. Some faces showed nothing. 2 showed something she could read as discomfort. Elias looked at the table. Aldridge turned to Damon's side of the table. Damon's attorney addressed the fraud documentation, the fund transfers, the partner notifications, the formal statement from Elias, the timeline establishing that the filing had been made under circumstances that constituted a conflict of interest on the part of the filing party. Celeste's attorney objected on the grounds of relevance. Aldridge overruled and allowed the documentation into the record. Then Aldridge looked at Ava. "Miss Morales, I understand you've requested an opportunity to address the board as the individual named in the filing." "Yes," Ava said. "You have 5 minutes." Ava looked at the table for a moment. Not the documents, not Damon, not Celeste, just the table, the dark polished surface of it, the faint reflection of the windows in its grain. Then she looked up. "The filing characterizes my presence at this company as evidence of a conflict of interest," she said. I want to tell you what my presence actually was. She kept her voice level and plain. No performance, just the shape of it. I'm a college instructor. I do temporary administrative placements between semesters to supplement my income. My best friend, who works for the agency that contracts with this company, got sick the Sunday before last and asked me to cover her placement. I had no prior relationship with this company. I didn't know who the CEO was until I saw the name on his office door. She paused. That's the true version of how I arrived here. It's verifiable through the agency's records, my friend's medical documentation, and the placement timeline. She looked at the table. Now, the filing also references 11 minutes, a timestamp showing that Mr. Blackwood accessed my file the night before I arrived. She looked up. I want to tell you what I think those 11 minutes were. The room was very still. I think they were a man sitting alone in his office at night, looking at the name of someone he'd lost, and trying to decide whether to interfere with the placement process or let it proceed. She kept her eyes level. He let it proceed. He didn't redirect the placement. He didn't engineer contact. He saw my name, and he made a choice to let something happen that he had no certainty about. She paused. That is a human choice. It is not a professional misconduct, and using it as the basis for a conduct review, while concealing the fact that the party filing the review had embezzled $4 million from her own partners and was trying to use this board as a mechanism to cover that theft. She stopped. Let the sentence sit. That is a misconduct. She looked at Celeste. Celeste was looking back at her. The precision was still there. The surface had not broken. But underneath it, in the set of her mouth and the quality of her stillness, Ava saw something that she recognized from her own worst moments. The specific exhaustion of a person holding something together by force of will alone, past the point where it was reasonable to keep holding. Ava looked back at Aldridge. That's all I have, she said. Aldridge nodded once. The deliberation took 40 minutes. Ava spent them in a small waiting room, adjacent to the boardroom with a cup of coffee she didn't drink, and the view of the city from a window that faced west, which meant she was looking at the inland spread of it rather than the lake. The streets and buildings going out in all directions with the particular democratic indifference of a city that kept going regardless of what happened on any individual floor of any individual building. Damon came in at the 20-minute mark. He didn't say anything. He sat in the chair adjacent to hers and put his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor. And she sat beside him, and they were quiet together in the waiting room with the city outside the window. And it was the most honest 20 minutes they had shared in the entire week, because nothing was being managed and nothing was being performed, and there was nothing left to do except wait for what came next. At minute 32, his hand found hers on the armrest between their chairs. She didn't move it away. At minute 40, Elias appeared in the doorway. He looked at Damon, then at Ava, and his expression contained the specific quality of someone who has just done the right thing after a period of not doing it, and is in the early stages of understanding what that costs and what it's worth. 4-2, he said. The review is dismissed. The filing is rejected. Damon exhaled once, a single slow breath, the kind the body produces after extended time under pressure, almost involuntary. His hand, still holding hers, tightened briefly. Celeste, Damon said. She left before the vote concluded, Elias said. Her attorney is still on the line with Aldridge. He paused. The fund's partners have formally engaged investigators. Her legal situation it will be significant. Damon nodded. Elias looked at Ava for a moment with the expression of a man who wanted to say something and was settling for less. Thank you, he said. What you said in there? You did the harder thing, she said. I just talked. Elias shook his head slightly as if disagreeing but too tired to make the case, and left. The days that followed had the specific quality of aftermath, not resolution, not recovery, but the strange hollowed-out calm of a space after the storm has moved through and before the rebuilding has fully begun. The board rejection was processed and formalized. Celeste Vaughn did not return to the building. Her attorney communicated through Damon's attorney, and the communications were precise and narrow and contained none of the voice Ava had heard on the phone 2 nights earlier, stripped of its smoothness and cold all the way through. The fund's investigation moved forward in the way such investigations moved, methodically, with consequences that would take months to fully materialize. Damon met with the fund's partners directly, not because his attorney recommended it, but because he decided that managed communications were no longer how he intended to conduct his life. He sat across from three people who had every reason to be furious, and he told them the full story of the $4 million without qualification. And the meeting lasted 3 hours, and at the end of it, there was an agreement in principle to repay the original amount with interest from the company's current accounts. It wasn't legally required. He did it anyway. Marcus told Ava about the meeting afterward in a brief phone call she hadn't expected. He didn't have to do that, Marcus said. The legal exposure was manageable. I know, Ava said. He told them everything, Marcus said. Not just the $4 million, the verbal agreement. What he understood Celeste had expected and why he hadn't delivered it. All of it. I know, she said again. A brief pause on the line. He's a different person than he was 2 weeks ago, Marcus said. Not quite a question. No, Ava said. I think he's the same person he always was. He just stopped managing the distance between himself and that person. Another pause, then, he's lucky you came back. Tell him that, she said. I'm still working on it. She went back to the university. The spring semester started on a Thursday, 12 days after the board session, and she walked into her 8 a.m. seminar with 34 students and a coffee from the corner cart, and the particular clarity of someone who had recently been reminded that her actual life was both smaller and more her own than anything that happened on the 42nd floor of a glass tower downtown. She liked her job. She had always liked her job. She had been so focused for years on what her life was not large enough, not financially stable enough, not architecturally dramatic enough against the skylines she glimpsed from other people's windows, that she had periodically forgotten what it actually was. It was hers. It was built on her own specific competencies and her own specific choices, and it was, brick wall view and all, sufficient. This did not mean she was finished with Damon Blackwood. He called, as promised. Not from the office line. The first call was 6 days after the board session, on a Sunday morning when she was grading papers at her kitchen table, and he asked if he could come over, and she said yes. He brought coffee from a place 2 blocks from his apartment, which she had not known the location of until he told her, and she filed the information away. Another coordinate on the map of a person she was in the process of relearning, more carefully this time, with the specific attention of someone who had once learned it fast and lost it, and understood now that speed was not the metric she was optimizing for. He sat across from her at the kitchen table, the same table, and they talked for 3 hours. Not about the company, not about Celeste. He told her about the last 3 years in more detail than the phone call had allowed. Not the broad strokes of the origin story, but the granular specifics, the particular days and the particular choices, and the moments where he had come closest to calling her, and the reasons he had told himself not to. She listened. She asked questions. Some of them were hard questions, and she asked them anyway, and he answered them without deflecting, which was something she tracked carefully, the way you track a new behavior that you want to know whether it will hold. The night before you arrived, she said. The 11 minutes. Yes, he said. What did you actually feel when you saw my name? He looked at the table, looked up. Like something came back on, he said. That's the only honest version of it. Like something that had been running on backup power for 3 years just came back on. She sat with that for a moment. I'm angry at you, she said. I want you to know that's still true. I'm less angry than I was 2 weeks ago, and I'll probably be less angry in 2 months than I am now, but it's still there. I know, he said. Don't tell me you know, she said, not unkindly. Show me you know. There's a difference. He looked at her for a long moment. What does showing you look like? It looks like not disappearing, she said. When it gets hard, when I'm angry, or when you're afraid, or when something complicated happens between us that doesn't have a clean resolution. It looks like staying in the room. She held his gaze. That's the whole list. It sounds simple, and it isn't. No, he said. It isn't. Can you do it? A silence. I don't know, he said. And the honesty of it, the absence of the easy answer, the specific courage of not managing even this, landed in the room with a weight that was, paradoxically, more reassuring than certainty would have been. I know what I want to do, he said. I know what I'm going to try to do. but I don't know yet whether I'm the person who can actually do it, and I'm not going to tell you that I am just because it's what you need to hear." Ava looked at him across the kitchen table. "That's the right answer," she said. They started slowly. Not because it was a strategy, but because slow was what the situation actually called for. And they were both, say, for the first time in their shared history, trying to give things what they actually called for, rather than what was expedient or comfortable or managed. He came over on Sunday mornings and brought coffee. She went to his apartment twice, which was on the north side, high up, with windows that looked at the city from the west. Different geometry than the 42nd floor, but the same basic truth about the city's scale. She learned the apartment the way you learn a person, gradually, in specific detail, noting what it revealed about who he had become in the years between them. He had books. More than she expected. They were not arranged carefully, which surprised her given the precision of everything else in his professional life. They were stacked and doubled and organized in some private system that wasn't alphabetical or by subject, but which she suspected had its own logic she hadn't yet decoded. She asked him about it once. "The ones I've read twice are horizontal," he said. "The ones I haven't finished are on the lower shelves." She looked at the lower shelves. There were very few books there. "You finish everything," she said. "I try," he said. Something in his voice when he said it was not about books, and they both knew it, and neither of them said so. Spring moved through Chicago the way it always did. Incompletely, 2 steps forward and 1 step back. A warm week followed by a cold snap. The lake making its own decisions about temperature regardless of what the calendar said. The semester progressed. She graded papers and prepared lectures and sat in department meetings and lived her small, sufficient life, except that it was not quite the same life it had been before the 7 days because something in its dimensions had shifted, not expanded. She was wary of that framing, the one where love was supposed to make things larger, different, more inhabited maybe. More specifically, hers. Carmen, who had